happens if you don't say, when the thing comes up, leave meeting or continue, and if you don't do anything, what'll happen?
I think it timed out or something.
You'll have that thing in front of you. I don't know.
Right, it'll be watching you forever.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah.
What
So,
happened to Beryl?
and now Beryl disappeared again. Okay,
She got timed out.
so I was thinking today about sharing a story. There she is. About sharing a story. We've read stories that come from all over the place, from some very amazing writers from ancient times, and from famous writers, from unknown writers. Today I picked the story. It's also related to immigration to Israel and the struggle for the state of Israel. So it's a little bit, this past, as I said, this past Saturday was the 5th of Iyar, which is the anniversary of the Declaration of Israel's independence. So I'm going to share in a moment a story. It's a story that was written by a couple of educators and published in a magazine called World Over magazine. So World Over magazine was a fixture of my youth. It was a kids-oriented magazine that was produced by the Board of Jewish Education of New York, I think. It was whatever it was, 16 pages or something like that. I'm gonna hopefully be able to screen share, and you'll see first some old pictures of the covers and the backs of some of these magazines, just because I want to give you a little flavor of the vehicle that this story comes from. Yeah, Carol.
Would these magazines be issued to would it just be Orthodox or conservative, or would it be also to Reform?
I'll talk to that. I'll talk about that in a minute.
Because I might have seen them when I was in religious school.
Right, you might have. Yes. So first I'm going to share the screen. And now I'm going to here. Why is this? This is not what I want. I want this. So this is from Flickr. And this is from it's uploaded from the Magnus Collection of Jewish Art and Life at UC Berkeley. And here's different covers of this issue, a magazine for Jewish boys and girls. So this started publishing in 1940. So some of this is very historically rooted, and that's part of where we're going to be looking at the story that that we're going to share. But you have here, United Nations organization. Obviously, the United Nations was something that was a new idea. It says here Talmud Torah. So this is the Hebrew school where people went, kids went after school. Here they're getting ready for Pesach. Grager Symphony for Purim.
That one I think I remember.
Look at that. Here they're playing Dreidel for Hanukkah.
I think it looks familiar.
Okay, this is obviously a map that talks about the Jewish state, the Arab state, but this is not, as you see, that area, this area is not the way it actually ended up. So this is pre-1948, this map. This is the partition map that the UN, that's the logo down here, that the UN authorized, but then of course war happened. Here's a mother and her daughter preparing for Shabbat. There's a July 4th kind of issue. So as you can see, this is the educational vehicle. I want to get to one of them that shows the back, because the back was the most fun feature. All right. I saw one before. There's General de Gaulle, remember him?
They're so graphically great. I mean, it's just great.
Yeah,
the designs are great.
Tremendous amount of creativity that went into this.
Your pod things, okay.
So
Hang on.
You can kind of see the, I don't know, Russian constructivism, influence. And
Right, and 50s kind of
Yeah.
aesthetic and so on. I want to get to here. So here,
The comics.
right, there were on the back page of the magazine, there was always a one-page graphic novelette, right? As we would say, we wouldn't say comics. We would say, a graphic thing. So this is the Defender in 1509. Johann Peppercorn, attacked the Jews. So here we have this whole, so in a nutshell, you have this tiny little piece of Jewish history that's put into, into a comic form so that everybody can be entertained. You have a little, game here. So there's another one. This one is about justice ruled by mercy. So this is like, I think this guy could be Brandeis maybe. Cardozo, see Cardozo. Benjamin Cardozo. So this is, this is the way it was, look at that. Civil War Seder. So this is obviously an attempt to strengthen Jewish identity within the American context. And again, many of these selections. So you get a little bit of a taste of what that was. I'm going to stop sharing for a second and I'll come back now. So Carol asked who was supposed to be the audience for this. So this magazine was written for American Jewish boys and girls. And it was available both to Talmud Torahs, in other words, Hebrew schools, and also to day schools if they felt that that this was acceptable material for them. But eventually the Orthodox decided that it was too inclusive, that it was too modern. And then the Orthodox educational movement created a breakaway knockoff of World Over called Olamenu, which means our world. We're not interested in going world over. We're not interested in looking at everything that's out there in the world. We're interested in our world. And they copied it almost exactly. Stories and a little reportage and a comic on the back, but it wasn't as good. Anyway, World Over, as I say, I have very, very precious memories from my youth of that magazine. And now what I'm going to do is screen share, and we're going to read a story that was written for American Jewish boys and girls. And this story is found in an anthology of World Over stories, the World Over Storybook. The World Over Storybook was published in 1952. And it encompassed works from the first 12 years of the publication. So we're going to go over here, and this is called Stowaway by Azriel Eisenberg and Abraham Siegel. Abraham Siegel's name is not familiar to me, but Azriel Eisenberg was a major force in Jewish education in the 50s and 60s, maybe the 70s. And the truth is, I don't know exactly when World Over stopped publication. It went through the 80s, I know. In fact, you can find online, if you put in World Over magazine, you can find a clip of a quotation that Miss Piggy was interviewed by World Over magazine. And when she hears that according to Jewish law, pigs are not kosher, therefore can't be eaten, she says, "That's a great idea. I love that idea. That's terrific." So so it lasted for a while, but the Board of Jewish Education has collapsed, and World Over magazine doesn't exist anymore either. So this is a story of its time. It's a little bit before 1948, but it doesn't. Unfortunately, the book doesn't give us the publication dates of the stories. Stowaway. That's the name of the story. Who'd like to begin reading for us? Okay, Carney, go ahead.
Okay, Stowaway. Moving with care, a thin, scrawny boy edged his way through the crowds in the Warsaw station. Around him, under the springtime sun, banners of blue and white waved to the boys and girls who leaned from the windows. "Shalom Aleichem," said the gay banners.
Say
"Boachem l'shalom, Boachem l'shalom."
Excellent.
The boy understood the Hebrew words. Farewell, they meant. Go in peace. Come in peace. He smiled bitterly. The banners seemed to talk to him as if he were going, as if everybody here had come to see him off. The whistle sounded twice, short and sharp. "Hurry up!" it shrieked, and the crowd surged forward like an attacking army.
You'll have to use your imagination here.
The boy
Was
who
pushed
pushed
along.
who was pushed along as the mob jostled closer to the cars. He could see the conductors. They strutted to and fro with frosty smiles, scanning tickets and hurrying passengers up the steps. In his deafened ears rang snatches of conversation. "Now don't forget to write.
Lehitraot.
Lehitraot be'eretz Israel. See you in the land of Israel." Eretz Israel. In a breathless whisper, he repeated the words. The cars were only a few yards away now, just beyond the living barrier of the crowd and the conductors. The boy dodged around an elderly couple and wormed his way along the side of a car towards the steps. Then his face crushed close to the broad blue back of a conductor. Before his eyes waved an arm striped with gold. A deep voice bellowed, "All aboard!"
Good.
Train jerked. The crowd retreated, flooding past the boy like an ebbing tide. For an instant, the car's steps were clear. A last desperate thrust, and he was climbing the steps. Back toward the car bounced the conductor, shouting. A long, shuddering breath from the locomotive. Then with short, angry puffs, it chugged out of the station like a panting fugitive escaping the clutches of an enemy. He ran on to the very last compartment, where he found a confused jumble of bags and bundles, all in a heap. He glanced back once along the empty aisle, then shouldered his way in among the luggage. He pulled duffel bags and cartons back over himself, burrowing deep like a mole in the ground. The train gathered speed, rocking him against the sharp edges of the baggage. Far away, the locomotive whistled a mischievous call. A sound of singing floated into him. Suddenly, near him, a youthful voice spoke. "Haver Shimon, have you seen our canteens?" Someone must have answered, for the voice said complainingly, "With the luggage? Do you see this heap of junk? How do you expect me to find anything in here?" The bundles began to move. In a panic, the boy pressed back like a wild beast brought to bay. A pack of blankets moved off his head, and he stared up into a tanned, angry face. Brown eyes opened wide at the sight of him. Cheeks reddened, and a determined mouth opened to say something. "Eretz Israel," the boy whispered, like a worshiper at prayer. Abruptly, the mouth above him closed, the eyes narrowed. Close by, the door banged shut, and a rough voice boomed, "Tickets! Tickets ready!" The blankets dropped back on the boy's face. In darkness, he heard the rough voice again, the young voice answering, but he was too frightened to make out what they said. Hours later, it seemed, the blankets again moved away, just a trifle, and somebody whispered, "Right here, Haver Shimon. A boy, I think." A deep, quiet voice, the calmest he'd ever heard, said, "Watch the corridor. If the conductor returns, begin singing and walk back to your compartment." "Right," said the young voice, and the boy waited. The deep voice began to question him. Against his will, he found himself answering, talking, explaining. "My name is Yehuda. I want to go to Eretz Israel. Nobody. I have nobody. They killed everybody in the pogrom. I walked from the village to Warsaw. I saw the train, the banners. I'm 14. I don't want to live in Poland. I want to go to Eretz Israel. To Eretz Israel." Under him, the train wheels too were clicking. "Eretz Israel, Eretz Israel." Suddenly, he began to cry, loud, like a little child, "Eretz Israel." The young voice spoke in urgent tones. "Haver Shimon, we've got to take him with us." "Just obey orders, Haver Dan." The deep voice held a ring of sternness. "Keep watching the corridor." Then, to the boy, "Quiet, boy, quiet. I'm going to take you out of there." A hand reached in, pulled him up amidst the scattering bundles in a strong, easy glide. "Slip into the next compartment with Haver Dan. Sit next to the window. Be quiet." He had time to see only the khaki shirt and the shock of black hair. He felt his hand seized, then light, air, scenery, sliding past a window. puzzled faces beyond a door. Voices. He was sitting on a hard wooden bench, crowded between the window and another boy. A sandwich was in his hand. He bit into it, swallowing in great gulps. The boy next to him put a bottle in his other hand. He put it to his lips, drank long and deep of the fresh water. Little by little, his eyes cleared and his ears stopped ringing. He was in a small compartment, hidden from the door by 3 other boys along the seat. Through the dust-speckled window beside him, a wide ribbon of farms and fields spun along. Across the room, on the opposite bench, 2 girls and a boy studied him curiously. Beside them, a slightly older-looking boy had the seat next to the door. Still and rigid he sat, so that he seemed hardly alive. Dark glasses hid his eyes. No thought or feeling showed in his face. His taut, white knuckles hugged a long, tapering object tight between his knees. With a start, Yehuda saw the man in khaki, Haver Shimon, leaning in the doorway, talking calmly with the conductor. "Don't be afraid," the boy next to him leaned forward as if to screen Yehuda from the conductor and pointed out the window. "Pretend you're one of us, and we're talking. I'll tell you everybody's name. I'm Don. Next to me are Yosef and Avraham. Just say something. Repeat the names." Yehuda licked his lips. "Don, Yosef, Avraham. Haver Shimon will get rid of the conductor. Haver means comrade, you know. That's Haver Shimon at the door. Right across you, the big fellow is Gedol. The girl is Rahel. The other boy is Ben-Zion." A slight pause, then, "and Hanan." Don sat back again, and Yehuda saw the conductor had gone. Everyone in the compartment broke into excited conversation, all but Shimon and the boy in dark glasses who sat next to him. "We're taking him along." Don, the boy next to Yehuda, planted his hands on his knees in a stubborn gesture. "But Don," the protest came from Rahel, the girl across the aisle. "How can we? He has no ticket, no passport. The border guards. I say we got to drop him off, and the sooner the better." Fascinated, Yehuda watched Rahel's tightly drawn lips and the deep frown on her forehead, pale against the startling blackness of her hair. She turned to the man in the doorway. "Haver Shimon?" All eyes followed hers. For a moment, Shimon's piercing blue eyes swept over every person in the compartment. "Yehuda," he said, "why do you want to go to Eretz Israel?" In the silence, Yehuda's voice sounded overloud as he tried to answer. "They killed my mother and father and my sister. I couldn't do anything. I was running home, but it was too late, and I hid in a tree. I hate them. I hate them all. I want to learn to be a fighter and kill all the Nazis." Rahel jumped to her feet. "That's not exactly what the Halutz movement stands for, is it? War, revenge, killing? What does he know about pioneering and building?" Yehuda liked her voice in spite of what she was saying. The words came from her lips in a measured flow, like the statement of a judge. "If we're caught, the Aliyah fails as far as we're concerned. Our whole kibbutz, our whole group will be in trouble with the authorities. We'll all be stopped and sent back."
Remember, we're talking Israel, it's Aliyah.
Aliyah. Don tried to interrupt, but she didn't let him. "This is Aliyah.
This is Aliyah.
Aleph.
Aleph.
Legal immigration. Not Aliyah bet, not border running and smuggling. Haver Shimon wouldn't be allowed in Poland again. We wouldn't be allowed out." Yehuda burst into angry speech. "I want to go to Eretz Israel," he shouted. "They can shoot me, but I won't go back." "Good for you, Yehuda," cried Don. "What about it, Haver Shimon?" Shimon put a large, powerful hand on the thin shoulder behind him. "Vote on it," he said. Don leaned forward. The girl looked around the compartment. Every head nodded, except Shimon and the boy with the black case between his knees. "The border's still to be crossed, Haver Don," said Rahel. Don's round face looked up at her, his nose wrinkling. "Well, we'll think of something." Yehuda had already thought of something. With hesitation, he said, "I could hide in the luggage again." "No." Shimon's calm, matter-of-fact tone drew everybody's gaze toward him again. The conductor is looking for a stowaway. He saw one get on the train, he says. He'll tell the guards. Yehuda shrank back against his seat, hardly hearing Don's fierce whisper. Don't worry, Yehuda. You're my friend. We'll stick together. We'll think of something. Yehuda's eyes filled with tears. He blinked, keeping them back. Panic swept over him, and he wanted to cry out. His thoughts, Dan's restrained whisper, the clicking on the rails all merged into one overwhelming chorus. Yehuda closed his eyes. Think of something, urged the whirling train wheels. Think of something. Think of something. When Yehuda awoke, he was wet with perspiration. Outside, it was dark. A dim lantern swinging from the ceiling threw swaying shadows up and down the walls. The others, too, were dozing, crouched together on the hard wooden benches. Shimon stood still in the doorway as if he'd never moved. Hanan sat upright, nursing the case between his knees, his eyes hidden. Rahel slept with head back against the wall. The train rocketed along, and the night slid by outside the windows like a black river. Beside Yehuda, Don sat up suddenly, yawning aloud. He grinned at Yehuda, then looked across to Shimon. Have Shimon? He whispered. Shimon turned, glanced at his wristwatch, nodded. Next stop, 5 minutes to go. Don's face came around to Yehuda. Well, I was thinking? Yehuda hesitated. Well, the voice reminded me, and then he burst out.
The darkness reminded me.
The darkness reminded me, and he burst out. The roof? Would they think of looking for me outside the car? Then when we crossed the border, I could climb down again. Don hugged him, exclaiming, That's it. That's a wonderful idea. Shimon nodded slowly. Risky. There's a ladder to climb up by on the side of the car, but it'll be cold and windy. Besides, it's raining. The roof will be slippery. Shimon looked steadily at Yehuda for a long moment, then returned to watching the corridor. But it can be done. Yehuda swallowed hard. The challenge in Shimon's words brought him to his feet, pulling away from Don's arm. I won't go back. I won't. Shimon nodded again, half smiling. Only a minute or so left, Havarim. Yehuda stumbled toward the door. Dan followed him. Shimon stepped aside, letting the boys out into the corridor. A few steps brought them to the car door. Yehuda yanked it open, letting in a great gust of wind and wet. Don was close behind. Hurry, Don's whisper urged him on. The train's slowing up. Yehuda reached for a rung, stretched out a foot. He clung tight to the ladder, flat against the side of the car. He clambered upward. Hazak, be strong. The word floated upward from Don's invisible form. He was on the roof. The wind struck him full in the face. The car rolled and rocked. He struggled for balance and fell flat on the rough, wet wood. Closing his eyes in terror, trying not to hear the wailing wind, he dug his nails into the boards. The car lurched from side to side as if to shake him off. Gusts of cold, wet drops stung his face and hands. Confused thoughts raced through his mind. Don had said, Haver, kamerad, had called Hazak to him. He tried to keep thinking of Don. He realized the train had stopped. On the ground below, swaying lanterns made faint, wet circles of light. Above the sluggish puffs of the locomotive, a man shouted, Passports! Show your passports! Doors opened and shut. The rain fell. The locomotive puffed in weariness. Then the light circles moved along the ground again, wobbling away into the distance. The train moved, stopped, moved again, faster. Now it was harder to hold on. He couldn't budge. He'd just lie there until, in a minute, he'd be hurled off the car into space. A touch on his feet, then Don's voice. Yehuda, come down. It's all right. But his legs and arms refused to budge. He felt himself rolling and cried out. But strong hands held him, pulled him, scraping against the rough wood, half helped, half carried him down the ladder and through the door into the warm air of the car. He felt himself lifted, put down again. Somebody was stripping off his wet clothes with skillful speed. rubbing his body with a rough towel, wrapping him in a thick, warm blanket. Something bitter and hot poured into his throat. He swallowed, choking. A hand patted him. Voices reached him through a drowsy mist. Did it, Haver Shimon? Yes, Haver, he did. He'll be all right, won't he? Well, yes, Haver, he will. And then quite suddenly, the blackness closed in on him. When he awoke this time, he would have felt better. The sun shone on green and gold fields flashing by the window, and the friendly hum of people's voices filled the compartment. Someone handed him fruit and bread and a bottle of water. He ate and drank and stood up, smiling shyly at the others. They smiled back. Rahel said, "You did a very brave thing. I don't think I could have hung on to the car roof the way you did." She paused, considering her next words. "I didn't have anything against you personally when I voted yesterday." Yehuda flushed, stammering a reply. "Oh, thank you all," he began, then finished lamely, "for everything." Don's entrance saved him. Don fell on him in glee. "Did you have anything to eat? Are you rested now? Isn't Czechoslovakia lovely?" "Well, you might let him answer one question at a time," put in Rahel tartly. "I'm fine." He seized Don's hand and squeezed it. "Can I get to Eretz Israel all right now?" Don's eyes got big and round, and he shook his head miserably. "Oh, we're pretty close to the Italian border. It's daytime now, and that roof trick wouldn't work." What'll I do?" cried Yehuda. "I've got to get across that border too." "You will. Don't worry. You will," Don insisted. "But how?" Nobody said anything. Don pulled Yehuda down on the bench. Yehuda listened to the noises of the train, watched the countryside unroll past the window. The train bumped through an echoing tunnel, rounded a curve, rattled over a bridge. Yehuda waited. At least Poland was behind him. He'd never go back there again. He had lots of questions he wanted answers to. Hanan, with his dark glasses in his case. Shimon. Was it he who'd carried him from the rooftop? Mostly he worried about the coming border, trying to think of a trick, a hiding place. "Get your kettle, Averdon." Shimon stood in the doorway again, his eyes taking in each person in turn. "Tea and some fresh bread and fruit, if you can." He glanced down at a timetable in his hand. 2-minute stop. Work fast. Don rose, took money from Shimon's outstretched hand, moved away along the corridor. Shimon nodded to Yehuda and sat down beside Hanan for a whispered conversation. It was Shimon, though, who did the talking. Hanan stirred a little, but listened in silence. When Shimon stood up again, Yehuda spoke hesitantly. "Other Shimon?" "Yes." Would I be able to hide again in the luggage? I mean, when?" Shimon, without a change of expression, shook his head. "I wouldn't advise that. It wouldn't be safe." He stepped out into the corridor, then turned round to face Yehuda with the same half smile Yehuda had seen before on his lips. "You did fine at the last border. See what you can figure out this time." And then he moved on. Yehuda looked about him but found no comfort. Hanan was still motionless. Rahel still read in her little book. The others talked or hummed or dozed. Yehuda missed Don, missed him greatly. And he puzzled over Shimon. Yehuda didn't know whether to fear him or admire him. A machine gun, maybe, in Hanan's case? Blind, maybe, behind those dark glasses? Came to with a start. Rahel was looking at him with a strange expression. The train had stopped. Could see Don hurrying across the platform, a big kettle in his hand, disappearing through a doorway. After a minute, he reappeared, balancing the kettle with care away from him. Faint blue steam misted up out of the spout, trailing behind Don through the air. Don saw him, waved. Yehuda stared at the kettle, excitement mounting in him suddenly. "I've got it," he shouted. "The kettle, the tea, the hot water." Don came bounding into the compartment. Yehuda ran over to him. "I have it. I have a way to get past the Italian border. I can sell tea." Yehuda's voice bubbled with eagerness. "I'll be outside the car again, so they won't notice me. I'll be selling tea to you. See?" Risky. The boys whirled to find Shimon behind them. But it has possibilities. Better work out every detail together. Averdon. Try to foresee every possibility, every obstacle. It's good practice. I'll pass the word along down the car. We'll need quite a lot of tea drinkers. Wait for me on the platform of this car. He nodded again and moved away. Don and Yehuda huddled in their corner, talking rapidly. Rachel sat and watched, listening half in scorn, half in admiration. If that scheme works, she said, I'll... The boys looked up. You'll what? Asked Don. Oh, never mind. Her lips formed a tiny smile, and her gaze dropped to her lap. I wish you luck. Don said, let's go, Yehuda. A few moments later, Yehuda waited on the car platform. Kettle in one hand, some money in the other. Milling around him were Don, Shimon, and 5 or 6 other young men. The train rolled in at a large, crowded station. Even before it stopped, armed guards leaped onto the steps. Around Yehuda, a terrific hubbub broke out. The 2 guards on the steps leaped upward. Yehuda squirmed his way among the bodies of the men, darted unnoticed down the steps, the kettle hugged close to his chest. Once on the ground, he forced himself to walk slowly. Nobody stopped him. Nobody called to him. He tried not to turn his head or pay attention to the noise and fuss in the car behind him. The man at the refreshment stand hardly looked at him, barking. What do you want, boy? Yehuda reached the kettle over the counter. Tea. The man took the kettle, filled it, handed it back, took Yehuda's money. The boy started back, his heart leaping, his mouth dry and sticky with fear. Here, boy, tea. The call came from the car windows. Don, Rahel, others, called to him as if he were a complete stranger. They stretched cups out to him. With great caution, he filled the cups, took the money they handed him, and moved along the platform next to the car. It seemed to Yehuda he'd been pouring tea for hours. The kettle grew lighter in his hand. It's getting empty, he whispered. Someone above him turned, passed the word back. Don appeared near him. Look sharp, Yehuda. We filled the other kettle from our teacups. Here. Suddenly, Yehuda lifted his empty kettle to the window, brought down a full one. He moved on again, answering endless calls for tea. Hazak, be strong, he thought dazedly. He wasn't sure why the word came to him now, but it encouraged him, strengthened him. He kept watching Don's window for the signal. Don would stick his head out and wink to him. Then Yehuda was to hop on the train. But no signal came. Yehuda pictured himself left alone in a strange country, without a friend in the world. A cool trickle of sweat rolled down between his shoulder blades. Suddenly, Yehuda heard Rachel's voice in a low, sharp hiss. Steady, Yehuda. Keep pouring. Couldn't help himself. He had to look over his shoulder. His blood pounded in his temples. A man was walking toward him along the platform. He carried a tray supported by a band around his neck. He was eyeing Yehuda and scratching his head in puzzlement. Turn around, ordered Rachel. Don, at the other end of the car, leaned half out the window. He snapped his fingers, drummed his hand on the side of the car. Signor, he shouted. Chocolates? Fruit? Candy? Over here, please. The man with the tray paused, hesitated, turned back to Don's window. Walk back to the other end of the train, Rahel's clear voice urged. Come back to the car on the other side. Hurry. The end of the train seemed miles away. At last, he reached it, jumped off the platform, and ran across the tracks. 2 short whistles sounded up ahead from the locomotive. Yehuda dropped the tea kettle and raced in panic along the narrow space between his train and the freight on the next track. The train strained forward, car jerking against car. 2 cars ahead of him, faces and hands, appeared in the windows, beckoning wildly. Panting, he raced against the moving train. Suddenly, a door opened near him. An arm swung out. A powerful hand met Yehuda's flailing arms, tightened and lifted him from the ground. He felt stunned and dazed. He fell, stunned and dazed, to the floor. He saw a blurred picture, people running towards the other end of the car, surrounding a blue-coated conductor in a loud, angry argument. Don appeared as if from nowhere, dragged him to his feet, lifted him forward, thrust him in a compartment door. Shimon appeared, took his post at the door, nodded quietly to Yehuda. Don, beside him again, burst out into song, and the others joined in. A gay song this time, full of lilting syllables that repeated themselves without end. Only Hanan remained silent. Panting, Yehuda too tried to sing some of the syllables, then stopped, embarrassed under Shimon's gaze. Well, we're safe now for a while, Don whispered. You'll have to sneak off the train at Trieste. Then nobody will check up on us again. Not until the ship leaves, Shimon, broad and solid, in the doorway, had heard him. It was a close call, Avedon, but well planned and good training for an emergency. You were especially helpful, Rahel. A flush tinged Rahel's cheeks. I said if the scheme worked, I would. She stood up and turned to the boys. Her voice rang out. Shalom, Haver Yehuda. Blushing, Yehuda stammered something. Happiness mounted inside him, choked him, brought tears to his eyes. Warm and joyful, he looked from Don to Rahel. Even Hanan didn't frighten him, sitting near the door like a statue, holding a case at its knees. Even Shimon, half smiling at him like a judge from the door. Even the thought of the ship, with its officers and guards who inspected every passenger, every piece of luggage. Rahel started a song again. Yehuda joined in, watching her lips, watching Don's lips, to learn the words. The Halotzim were gathered in a crowded room in a lodging house near the wharf in Trieste. With the swiftness of a passing shadow, Yehuda had scrambled off the train unobserved. And now there was a new problem to face. Outside, the noise of the wagons and trucks was mounting as the city began its daily chores. Havarim, said Shimon, we got to find a way to get Yehuda on board the ship to Eretz Israel. Any suggestions? Got to stow Yehuda away on the boat, Don blurted out, hesitating. The boat is guarded day and night, remarked Shimon. We've already checked. Then let's bribe a stevedore, said Don stubbornly. Yes, bribe a stevedore to stow him away. For that, Haverim, we need cash, and more than we can spare. His words lingered on, leaving everyone silent and thoughtful. Don jumped up and held out his cap. Well, cash it is. Pay up, Haverim. Right into the kitty. When everyone had contributed, Don held it all out for all to see. They shook their heads sadly. Not enough. A voice spoke up in the back. Suppose one of us got a job as stevedore. We could arrange to stow Yehuda away by ourselves. Some heads perked up hopefully, but Shimon shook his head matter-of-factly. It won't do. We're all new faces here. None of us knows Italian. We'll just arouse suspicion. Suddenly, Don jumped up, his eyes shining with eagerness. How long till the steamer sails? 2 days, said Shimon dryly. Well, why can't we find jobs and earn some money? What do we have all that training for? He whirled from one to the other. Well, you can do carpentry. You know how to lay bricks. You, Rahel, can cook. I'll scout around the docks and find some work. And while there, he winked and smiled broadly. I'll find the right man for us. He stopped to catch his breath. Everyone looked toward Shimon, who raised his eyebrows, pursed his lips, and nodded. Well, that's it. That'll do it. The faces of the Havarim lit up. Tov, good, that's the idea, everyone said all at once. Let's go then, Shimon said. I'll go with you, Don. Then to Yehuda, don't leave this room for anything. And don't let anyone in, Don said. And then Yehuda was alone in the room, listening to the footsteps racing down the stairs. He felt dazed. 2 days ago, he had no friends, no hope. Now he had the best friends one could hope for. With them, he could face anything. The day passed slowly. He dozed a little, ate a little, thought about the town, about Eretz Israel. But Mostly he thought about Don, his quick, clever, brave new friend. Shadows began to thicken in the corners when footsteps mounted the stairs and the Havarim rushed in, laughing and excited. Soon Don came in breathlessly. Behind him came a swarthy, broad-shouldered man. The Havarim looked at each other. Unable to contain himself any longer, Don turned to his guest and with a broad flourish, he exclaimed, Meshulam, meet my Havarim. Havarim, meet Meshulam. Shalom Aleichem. Achim Yehudim. Cries of surprise burst from all sides. Is he Jewish? Meshulam is from Salonika, and he's the son of a family of stevedores from many generations. He'll help us. While Rachel and the others prepared supper, Shimon, Meshulam, and Don held a long, whispered conference. Yehuda waited, taut and nervous. During the meal, Don explained to Yehuda, it's all settled. As soon as Shimon gets back, we'll start. Meshulam's going for a trunk. A trunk? Exclaimed Yehuda, bewildered. But what for? Don smiled and, putting his fingers to his lips, said mysteriously, you're going for a little ride, Yehuda. A few minutes later, Shimon appeared in the doorway and nodded to Don. Don got to his feet and walked out with him. Morning found the Halutzim at the breakfast table, excited and feverish. Some left hurriedly to finish their jobs of the day before. Others were busy packing. Yehuda kept busy helping, carrying, fetching, doing whatever was asked of him. He moved as if in a dream. By afternoon, the Havarim had gathered. Don appeared flushed and tense. He removed his cap and with a sweep of his arm, he cried out, all right, Havarim, the kitty is waiting. Bills and silver filled the cap. Yehuda watched, trembling, as a quick count was made. Slowly, a broad grin spread over Don's face. Hurrah, we made it, he shouted jubilantly. He rushed over to Yehuda and pumped his hand. You're as good as in Tel Aviv already. Get ready. Say shalom to the Havarim. You won't see them for a few days. But no tears now. It's all set. Then he motioned to Shimon and they left the room. Yehuda exchanged a hurried shalom with every Haver. He gulped hard as he felt his eyes burn and ache. He noticed Rahel's eyes shine and her chin tremble. He was greatly relieved when Don appeared again. Don put his arm through Yehuda's and pressed it tight. They left the room in silence. No one spoke. After a quick and wordless walk in the twilight, Yehuda smelled the cool salt tang of the sea. They stopped at a corner of an alley, waiting. A cart came by, stopping at Don's signal. Don looked around to make sure no one was in sight, and then, nudging Yehuda, said in a half whisper, the trunk. Climb up in the cart and get into it. Bewildered, Yehuda felt himself hoisted and pushed into the cart. Don opened the lid of the trunk. As if under a spell, Yehuda stepped in and lay down. Don thrust a bundle into his hands, and then the lid snapped shut over his head. A cold fear gripped Yehuda. Felt like crying out when Don's whisper came to him in the stuffy blackness of the trunk. Can you hear me? The trunk has air holes, and there's food and water in the bundle. Don't make any noise, and don't try to get out, no matter what happens. It might take a long time, but we'll come for you. Lehitraot. We'll be seeing you, Yehuda. The trunk began to bounce around as if the cart had started up again. One end slid downward as if they were going downhill. Yehuda waited, petrified. A sudden jar, and then the motion of the cart ceased. Someone tugged at the trunk, yanked it along the floor. Then Yehuda went head over heels as the trunk was pushed off the cart and dragged some more. Outside, Yehuda could hear a hubbub of voices, a clattering of wheels, and a thudding. Again, the cold hand of fear gripped his chest. What if they placed him head down? Would they pile baggage and suitcases on the trunk? Would they stop up the air holes? Then someone gripped the trunk and shouted in a deep, booming voice, Hey, careful how you handle this trunk. We don't want any complaints. Yehuda's heart jumped as he recognized Meshulam's voice. A wave of hope lifted him out of his fear and despair. Good old Meshulam, leave it to Don, he thought, and a smile crossed his face. Motionless again and lying flat on his back, Yehuda caught his breath. The trunk was big and roomy, and he tried to find a comfortable position. Holding tight the bundle Don had given him, he closed his eyes, tried to sleep. A long time went by. He opened his eyes and saw pinpoints of light through the air holes. He heard confused noises, shouting and loud banging. One end of the trunk rose suddenly, dropped again, then the trunk began to move smoothly forward as if on wheels. Yehuda pressed hard with his arms and legs, holding on for dear life. Trunk settled down with a bang and a jar. Men moved around it, lifting it, dropping it again. A loud whistle, and then the trunk seemed to fly straight up in the air in a wide arc and then down again, this time gently. Yehuda heard a slapping sound over and over again. Why, I must be on the ship, he thought. Another whistle, then a deep rumbling noise. The slapping sound grew stronger. The trunk began to move slightly in a queer or rolling motion. Yehuda waited, his mind a blank. Nothing happened for a long time. He ate a little, drank a little. His arms and legs grew stiff and numb. Every time he tried to move them, thin needles of pain shot through his body. Again, panic seized him. Had they forgotten him? Was he really in a trunk on a boat for Eretz? Or was it all only a mocking dream? Maybe he wasn't even alive. Or maybe he wanted to shout, to kick the trunk and call for help. But Don said, no noise, we'll come for you. Yehuda began to talk to himself. Hazak, I didn't fall off the roof, and I didn't get caught selling tea. I can stand to wait in a trunk. He recited prayers, tried to hum some of the songs. The songs the Havarim had taught him. Imagined what Eretz Israel would be like. And then footsteps at last, and Don's voice. Yehuda, are you all right? The trunk lid swung up. He blinked in the strange light, sniffed at the strange air. He felt strong hands around his body, rubbing his cramped limbs. Come on! He was walking, stumbling up a ladder. Every muscle ached. He felt rather than saw who was guiding him. A stairway, a rail. He could see better now. Familiar faces here and there, Havarim watching to make sure he would not be caught. He breathed deep as a fresh gush of spray-filled wind beat on his face. A canvas-covered lifeboat emerged out of the dark, suspended over a wide, green, rolling ocean. Inside, quick, said Don's voice in his ear. When we get to the coastline, our sea scouts will come out to meet us. They'll smuggle you past the guards. And then it'll all be over. We'll be together again, for good. Yehuda didn't have time to say thanks. He was in a dark and stuffy place once more, with bundles pushed in his arms again. The canvas lifted for a moment, and Don's face appeared in the opening. Well, how's this for service? He chuckled. You have a nice big boat all for yourself. Next stop, Tel Aviv. The canvas dropped. Yehuda settled down in the dark. Soon, his wanderings would be over, and he would begin a new life. The seesaw of the boat slowly lulled him to sleep.
That's the story.
That's the story.
So
It stops at an interesting part because you don't know how they got him off the ship and what he did once he got to Israel.
well, for that, we have to remember last week's story. Right? Last week's story was about all those people waiting on the coast, waiting for these, smuggling boats to bring people in.
But I thought these people were legal immigrants.
But he wasn't. That was the
Oh,
thing.
okay.
The other chalutzim had gotten that they made this quota that allowed them to come in, but he stowed away. So he didn't have the papers. He wasn't allowed. They would have thrown him back. So he had to be smuggled. So any thoughts about the story? Any reactions?
It's how strangers help another stranger.
That's for sure. You get this tremendous group effort. Everybody goes out and works for 2 days and then donates all of their hard-earned money to save this one kid, right? I mean, there's so many. It's a very obviously, it's like I said, it was produced by an educational organization. It's very didactic. It's trying to teach different kinds of things. Solidarity, obviously, devotion to the Jewish people and to the land of Israel. Being very, very upfront about the terrible destruction of Jewish life in Europe. What other kinds of things, elements are in this story that have a kind of a didactic?
Yeah, no, I figured. I know.
You could translate it
Yeah.
to,
No, I hear you.
the U.S.-Mexican border very easily.
Right.
Yeah, no, we
Yeah.
haven't heard anything.
Except, I mean, we're not that aware of it. I don't know who is. The organization behind it, right? This guy, Shimon, he's the veteran guy. All of these young people have been trained to be pioneers in Israel, and now they're on their way. There's this whole infrastructure that is able to then accommodate the smuggling of this one extra person.
Could it be Hayes?
Well, Hayes is tries to greet people once they get here, but there isn't this infrastructure behind. Everybody's just desperately running. Everybody, unfortunately, in the present situation with our border, is the stowaway situation with nobody else with the capabilities to give that extra piece of help and support, whether it's emotional, social, organizational. There's nobody. He couldn't. The first, if you go through the first way that he evades detection, because he's up on the roof, nobody thinks of looking at the roof. The second is like this whole coordinated escape plan. Everybody's got to be, making believe that they want to drink tea and that they're going to buy it from him, and then they have to refill his tea, pot, because they know that he's going to run out, and they have to keep it going. There's this whole, it's organization, which is of course one of the great miraculous triumphs of the Zionist movement, in terms of getting us to the establishment of the state of Israel. I want to just make a point. Anybody, would this story fit in an Orthodox youth magazine?
I don't think so.
Why not?
It's just a feeling. I'm not sure, because it doesn't show that he's a religious person or the children are religious people.
Right.
Well, nobody thanks God.
Right. There's one place at the end where he prays a little bit when he's in the trunk, hoping. But religion is not like a big deal here. There is this, determined effort to keep on throwing in Hebrew words at different places and then translate them so that anybody reading the story will learn the word chazak, right? They'll learn the word shalom chaverim, right? These are, simple kinds of strategies for giving people basic, some basic Hebrew familiarity. But there's also a little romance in there, right? There's this girl, Ruth, right? Is that her name? Ruth? Rachel. How quickly we forget. Rachel, starts out as being, just like in the 40s and 50s movies, the very spirited young woman. In the beginning, she's a little negative toward the leading man. By the end, she likes him. So there's this, and he notices her expression. He notices, that she's a little nervous for him. There's this little budding 14-year-old romance story that's accepted as part, a part of a healthy, situation. That's anathema, whatever it's called. And, this would never make it in the other magazine, because you can't have this like easygoing and even, sort of like tantalizing budding of romantic feelings between the sexes. So there's a whole range of kind of gentle ways of trying to show, hey, we can be the new Jews, we can be proud of ourselves, we can be heroic, we can be we need to be for each other, and we're going to have this, and it's okay to have a boyfriend and a girlfriend. All of these kinds of things they're trying to say normalize Jewish life in the face of the greatest disaster that the Jewish people ever endured. So it's got so many different levels. I mean, for my taste, it goes on a little long. It's one of the longest. Bye-bye, Beryl. It's one of the longest stories in the anthology, but it's long for a reason, right? They're really trying to get the readers who are 8, 10, probably not 14, to feel the whole process, to feel the terror and the courage, right? To feel the solidarity, to feel the desperation, and then to feel how to get, out of it.
And the helping,
and the
learning to
helping.
help, learning to help people, and
Right,
how
and then-
you can think on your feet to help people.
Right.
It has very, very much the tone of the stories I remember from Boys Life magazine growing up.
Very much like that. Exactly.
The
Right.
it's sort of a boy's adventure story, but with
Exactly. Right. A perfect analogy, right? So this is like taking that genre and Judaizing it and Hebraizing it and Zionizing it.
exactly.
Exactly. So and then there's this little exotic touch, this Greek Jew, right, who was a stevedore, right? Believe me, so we're at the cusp of the white collarization of American Jewry. When I was a kid, there were still kids my age, who had parents who were workers. By now, that's unheard of in the Jewish community. But Europe, in that time, Jews were all over the place, and being a longshoreman and that kind of thing was actually a traditional Jewish occupation. So this Greek Jew, who's actually a refugee from Salonika, the Nazis destroyed the Greek population of Salonika, is this guy that's able to help out. Yeah, John.
I wonder what language he was speaking when he said, when the boy overheard him. Like, I was thinking, could it be Yiddish? Maybe there's a lot of Jewish stevedores and he's speaking, because the boy would speak Yiddish or Polish, right?
You would assume that they're coming from, but he's coming from a non-Yiddish speaking community.
Right, and he's also in Italy, so.
And he's had to find his way to Italy,
Right. I was just trying to figure out how the boy would understand.
Right. That's not exactly explained. The people that live in port situations learn multiple languages. Who knows? Are they speaking Hebrew? Because that's the common language of the Jewish people across the world. Who knows? Yeah, it doesn't tell us. Doesn't tell us what's going on. All right. So we'll stop here, and hopefully we'll find another story to share next week.
I hope
Thank
so.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you,
you,
Rabbi.